planning to refresh Arabic, Italian, French, and Spanish all at the same time, and all languages have varying levels, different goals, and deadlines. I've actually taken a break from all of them. So how do I juggle all of them? Step one is I always want to get clear on why I want to refresh each language. Because if we don't pinpoint our reason for doing something or refreshing something, then as we face roadblocks, as will inevitably happen in our learning, it can be harder to anchor and ground ourselves back to why this language or these languages are so important for us in the first place. And by the way, every and any reason for learning your language is valid because it's super personalized. By knowing our purpose and our reasons for learning a language, we can increase our internal motivation long and short term, which, as studies have shown, internal motivation will have a longer positive effect on our discipline instead of only external motivation that we get from other people. So here are my reasons for each of my 4 languages. I am learning Arabic because I want to do an immersion program in Jordan in about 4 months. And I also plan to stay with a host. So this is a very tangible purpose with a deadline. For Spanish, I have a Peru trip coming up. This is also very tangible with a deadline because I know exactly when that trip is and can prepare for it accordingly. For Italian, I want to feel confident enough to be able to teach it in the future. So this is tangible, but there is no given deadline yet because I haven't understood exactly when will be the right time for me to actually start teaching, but I know I want to do it. And for French, I simply miss the language. So there's not a tangible event that is coming up. There is no deadline in sight with this language, nor trip, nor obligation that I am tying to my purpose for refreshing it. I simply tie the language to enjoyment. So now that we have established purposes for returning to each of these languages, whether they're tangible or non-tangible is not as much of the point. Truly knowing yourself as a learner and understanding where you are going to pull your internal motivation from. The next thing I do is always audit my time according to the month I'm currently in and according to my weekly habits already established. And this will help me see, okay, how could I perhaps include study materials or lesson plans for each of these 4 languages with the time that I have left. So in terms of auditing my monthly time, I always pick out the non-negotiable events, appointments, etc. that I cannot move around for language study, or it's just a boundary for me and I'm not willing to sacrifice that time for replacing it with language study. This can look anything from tax day, which I definitely have to set a whole day aside for, a scheduled trip, a wedding. For me, I definitely have some appointments coming up, but this month, luckily, I am not as overloaded as I sometimes am. For a weekly time audit, looking at my current schedule, what is it actually like? My non-negotiables currently are my morning routine where I always include some sort of exercise like Pilates, and then I also meditate and sometimes journal. It's always important to set our own boundaries for ourselves in our language learning. So this is one of mine. I also have 1 day off per week that I will dedicate to resting. And if that includes language learning that day, then that's great. But language learning is generally not a requirement to be fulfilled on that 1 day off. And another non-negotiable for you could be if you already have some sort of language learning routine that you don't want to give up for whatever reason, right? For example, I am coming back after a full break of not actively learning languages, so I do not have a current language learning routine. However, you may have been learning Spanish and you want to refresh Italian and French at the same time. Well, you're going to say to yourself, I still want to dedicate time to Spanish for this and this reason. So I'm not going to replace Spanish learning with Italian and French learning for now. The next thing I do is I always audit my energy currently. And I also think back about how my energy has been within the past few months. When was my energy the highest? And what shifts in energy have I noticed? So usually on a daily basis, my energy is highest before lunchtime, and then sometimes after dinner time, depending on the day and depending on how busy I've been in my personal life for language study. My weekly energy can sometimes fluctuate. I have been an introvert my whole life, so if I've really been socializing a lot for 1 week, for example, then I know I'm going to have to turn down my language learning schedule in order to allow myself to rest. So social events for me would definitely be an event that shifts energy for me. And especially if there have been really big dips or really big surges in your energy, determine what events caused that to happen so that you can better plan for how your energy is likely going to be for this upcoming month when you are refreshing languages. After auditing my energy, I then think about, okay, how can I construct a plan that aligns with both my energy and my time? So currently, because I'm not that busy this month, there aren't a lot of energy draining activities on the calendar yet. However, there are sometimes meetups that I potentially plan to go to in the evenings, maybe about once a week. So I'm going to leave that box open on my calendar. Perhaps my language learning schedule will look a bit more reduced on those specific days where my energy will be taken up by another event. For now, I'm looking at around 2 hours per day just on weekdays for refreshing my languages. Input such as speaking and writing done mostly in the morning after my morning routine, and then also some more passive input such as reading and listening. Another thing about energy is I always advise language learners to include in your language learning plan intentional time to reassess how your energy and how your time is being affected by your current language learning routine that you're trying out for refreshing your language. Maybe what we thought we could do, we have overestimated our abilities to actually do in reality, right? And on the other hand, you might see, okay, I actually do have more energy and time that I can dedicate. I usually do this reevaluation every 2 to 3 weeks. The next thing I do is I review previous language learning plans. Now, this can be either mentally or I can literally go back in my calendar and see, okay, what did I write down? Now, I do keep track of my resources in my time tracker that I made for any language learner who is learning either 1 up to 10 languages. So you can not only track your time, but also track your resources. If you are interested in getting the same tracker, it is available in the comments below. So after identifying my previous resources used for each of my 4 languages, I ask myself, how helpful were each of these resources in getting me to my previous level? Of course, I don't return to anything that wasn't interesting for me because that will definitely demotivate me. And really, I've noticed over time with any language, I usually have a base resource, aka just a foundational resource that I know that I can always turn to review grammar, to review vocabulary, to have a nice sequence to follow, especially as a solo language learner without a teacher. And by knowing I have base resources for every language, it's easier for me to look back and see and be able to reference my past language learning plans. So you see, I like using textbooks as my base resource. They have been different for each one of my languages that I want to refresh. So I am going to incorporate each of them back into my language learning routine. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I will comb through absolutely every single page of these textbooks. It just means that it will be a good review to build back up that foundation of knowledge that I had in each language. However, as we are about to see, building up the foundation again and refreshing will be different and look different for each language. So before adding any other additional resources into what I already see available in my base resource, I have to audit my current level with the previous level that I had, because inevitably we are going to drop a level or several depending on the previous level we were at in a language, and also depending on how big our break from the language was. How quickly we will be able to refresh a language depends on that previous level, right? So most of the languages that I am refreshing, I have been either at a B1-ish, a B2-ish, or a C1-ish in the past. For languages I used to be at a B1 at, I most likely have a A2. If I used to be at a B2 level in the past, most likely drop down to a B1 at my current level. And if I was at a C1 in the past, in a language, then I will most likely be more at a B2. So what do I do for languages that I used to be around high A2, B1 at? I will most likely have lost that knowledge more rapidly. Now, in my case, this would definitely be Arabic. I started and got to around almost a B1, I would say, and then I stopped. I have taken a break probably for about 8 to 9 months from the language. So because that foundation wasn't as strong initially, I need to go back and refresh, as I said. And I've already accepted it will take more time to refresh this kind of language. For B2-ish previous languages, as I said before, I am probably now at a B1. So for me, that looks more like this language is going to take less time to refresh. I will need less easing into the language with listening and reading, and I can return to doing output more quickly, aka speaking and writing. So I usually do 1 week of strict input with my mid-level languages, such as French. I'll listen to some of my previous podcast. I will go back through the textbook that I like using for French and just read through it, refresh my knowledge of some of the essential vocabulary in each chapter. And then after that week, I will start having a conversation class or go to a meetup with other learners of that language, etc. And as previously stated, with languages that I was previously a C1 at, most likely I've dropped down to B2. But usually at this level, I have already built up that really strong foundation. So even if I have dropped down to a B2 level, I still like to go back to the novels, the grammar textbooks that were labeled C1 for that language. Go back automatically to doing input at the same previous level that I was at, even though I've dropped down a level. It will be more manageable for me to quickly refresh the words, the phrases, the grammar than I would be able to do at lower levels. Next thing I do is I reassess my goals that I want to hit for each language, because I'm sure they have changed at least a little bit in between the time that I stopped learning the language and the time that I decide to want to refresh it. So what does that look like for me? With Arabic, it is a beginner, low intermediate language for me. But in terms of my goal, I know that there is full immersion involved, right? It's tangible and there is a deadline for it. My particular goal in order to achieve my purpose in my language is to pass the placement exam that my language school is going to give me probably in August. I want to pass the B1 level and be able to enter B2 immediately. So as I said, I'm going to spend more time with input. Not only am I going to use my base resource, which are the Minerva textbooks, I'm also going to do input with Mango Languages. And both of these resources I got from my previous resources. And next month, because I know I will only have about 4 months to really refresh the language, I will start to add more output. That means for me, speaking with a teacher 1 time per week in a conversation class. Now with my higher level Spanish, my purpose is also full immersion, because I will be, during my program in Peru, staying with a host family who speaks little to no English. And my goal in order to get and fulfill that purpose is to communicate while I'm abroad only with the host family in Spanish. And I want to be able to take a tour completely in Spanish with a tour guide while I am at Machu Picchu and be able to understand enough to converse and ask questions about the history. I have a tight timeline for this, so 2 months or less. And because this is a more advanced language, I am automatically going to dedicate this month to immediate input and speaking with a teacher about relevant topics. What I'll also do this month is do an online placement test. Usually these are readily available in lots of languages. And why do I suggest this? Because it is a great indicator what you are still potentially stuck on, and it will automatically identify the gaps in your knowledge that you can then use as a focus for as you are stepping into the first month of refreshing your language. What I do, for example, is with this online placement test for Spanish, I will answer everything on my phone, and then I will, as I'm answering, take screenshots of questions that I am really not sure about. Because on placement tests, I can guess right technically, but I still want to take a screenshot of what I'm not sure about and be able to ask a teacher or do some Googling research by myself for it after the test is over. For my other 2 languages, French and Italian, the former lingering around a B1, the latter lingering at around a B2. So both of these have less tangible purposes. And if anything, they're more for fun. So for these languages, because there is no tight timeline, I will fill in whatever free time is not dedicated to Spanish and Arabic with passive reading and listening in Italian and French. I also plan maybe 2 times a month to take conversation classes for both languages. I will also include flashcard review sessions, which I usually do on the app Quizlet, about 15 to 30 minutes each, depending on my energy levels, and doing these review sessions 2 times a week. What I also like to do at this higher level with languages is to language stack. Essentially, when making flashcards for my urgent, on tight timeline languages like Arabic and Spanish that I am more intensely focusing on, my definitions on the other side of the flashcard will not be in my native language English. Instead, I'm going to put that definition in Italian and or French, my more intermediate languages, so that when I am doing my flashcard review, I can learn and refresh multiple languages. So overall, you can see that when when I am refreshing 2 or more languages, I always have maximum one A2, B1-ish beginner language I am intensively focusing on, and that probably takes most of my study time. Then I have maximum 2 high intermediate B2-ish languages that I am also focusing on at the same time. And I like that I have varying levels in each language, as well as varying goals, where some goals are more flexible, like for French and Italian, and some goals are more concrete and have deadlines, just like for Arabic and Spanish, so that I don't feel as much stress and won't feel so buried and overwhelmed in what should be a very enjoyable process for us that will keep our motivation going in the long run.